Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to look at identity access management and we're going to have our very first lab. So you need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here we are in the AWS console and this is a brand new AWS account that I've set up. I've never used it before. You can see I've never visited any other services before. And this is what the console looks like. You can go through and go down all these different learning pathways and they'll teach you about specific products. Sometimes they have video tutorials, sometimes they have labs. The labs could either be free or you paid for labs. It really depends on what you use. But if we go all the way up the top, there's something I just want to show you. It's this top right hand corner. And this is where you select your region. So it's probably best if you select a region that's closest to you, but you should also be aware that not all regions have the same services. So things like Glacier might not be available in a particular region. So pick the region that's closest to you. I'm based out of London, so I'm going to do the London region, and then we'll go ahead and start. And just make sure for the rest of this course that you use a region that's closest to you. If you see something that is on my screen but it's not on your screen, then I would change regions. It's because probably that there'll be a service that's not available in your particular region. So what we need to do to get into IAM is we go up to this services section and we can see now we've got a drop down of all the different high-level services and low-level services in the AWS console. So identity access management comes under security, identity, and compliance. And we go in here and click on IAM. And you'll use IAM a lot in the real world when you're dealing with AWS. Okay, so we've logged into IAM, and the very first thing you should notice is up here, notice how IAM doesn't have a region, it just says global. And that is because IAM is global. So when you create users, groups, roles, all of that, they will be available all across the world. It doesn't matter what region you're in, they're universally available. And that is a subject that can come up in the exam, so do remember that. Now you'll see over here it says IAM users sign-in link, and then it gives you basically a number.signin.aws.amazon.com/console. Now that number isn't random, that is actually your AWS account number, and you can get that if you ever need it in future by clicking on your username and then clicking on my account. Now that obviously can be difficult to remember, so what can you do? Well, you can customize it. So we can type in here something that we'd remember. So this will set up a new DNS namespace. DNS is obviously going to be unique. So if I type in a cloud guru, we won't be able to get it because somebody's already taken it. So it says the alias already exists. But I'll try a cloud guru 2017. Hopefully no one's taken that. I can't believe it. Somebody has already taken that. So I'll just do a. Go ahead and hit yes, create. And guys, don't steal 2018 or I'll be mad next year. Okay, and you'll notice over here we've got security status and we've got 5 different items here. And we've already got our delete your root access keys as ticked, and we've got 4 more things to do. And the very first thing is to activate multi-factor authentication on your root account. Now, what is a root account? Well, your root account is simply the email address that you use to sign up with AWS. And when you log in with root account, you have root level access. So you could go in and provision 20 virtual machines that have huge amounts of compute and memory capacity, and it will start costing you, a fortune. So root account gives you unlimited access to do things in the cloud. Now, of course, you probably don't want all your employees in an organization to have that level of power. You might want human resources to only be able to read files inside of S3, for example. So what we would normally do and what Amazon recommend that you do is that you only ever log into the root accounts once or twice when you need to, but you create users inside your AWS account and then group those users into groups and then assign permissions to those users. So the first thing we're going to do is enable multi-factor authentication into our root account. The reason we're doing this is that in case somebody finds out our email and our password, they still won't be able to log in without a physical device. So let's go ahead and click on that and go manage MFA. And you can see there's 2 different types. You can have a virtual MFA device or a hardware MFA device. So we're going to go for virtual. Go ahead and hit next. And that says to activate a virtual MFA device, you must first install an AWS MFA compatible application onto the user's smartphone, PC, or other device. And if you click here, you can actually get a whole list of different devices that are supported. And if we scroll all the way down, you can see virtual MFA applications. So right now it's supported for Android, iPhone, Windows Phone, and for BlackBerry. And most of the time we're using Google Authenticator. So if you've got a Android, iPhone, or BlackBerry, go ahead and download Google Authenticator. If you've got a Windows phone, go ahead and download Authenticator and install it on your phone. Once you've done that, go back to the AWS console. So come back over here, and we're going to go ahead and hit next step. Now, what will happen is you'll get one of these, and these are a QR code. And all you need to do is go into Google Authenticator and scan this QR code. Okay, so this is what Google Authenticator looks like on my phone. I'm going to hit the little plus sign, and then you can see scan barcode. I'm going to scan the barcode, hold it up, and there we go. And now all I have to do is enter in this code. So it's 007001, 007001, and then I'm going to wait for the code to change, and then I enter the second code. And there we go. So it's 841294, 841294. And go ahead and hit activate virtual multi-factor authentication, and there we go. It says the device was successfully associated. And if I just refresh this page, we should be able to see we've got our second green tick. Okay, so in here we've got our username. So I'm just going to type in my name. So it's going to be Ryan. We can add other users if we want, but I'm just going to keep it quite simple. In fact, let's do 2 users. We'll do Ryan and we'll do John. So you can see down here it says select AWS access type. Select how these users will access AWS. Now you can access AWS in 2 different ways. You can access it via the management console, which is what we're in right now, and then there's also programmatic access. So this is where your applications could access AWS. You might have the command line tools installed on your laptop or desktop, and you want to store your files in S3. That would be programmatic access, and I'll show you how to do all that later on in the course. So I'm going to say for my access type that my users want to both have programmatic as well as AWS management console access. Now you can see down here it says console password. Do you want to auto-generate a password or a custom password? Let's just leave that as auto-generated. And then require password reset. Users must create a new password at the next sign-in. I'm just going to leave that as is. We go next, add permissions. And you can see here it's saying set permissions for Ryan and John, and you can add users to group, copy permissions from an existing user, or attach existing policies directly. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to go in and create a group. So go ahead and hit next. Now, what is a group? Well, obviously group is what we mentioned earlier on in the last lecture. So you could have a group for your finance department, you could have a group for your developers, you could have a group for your system system administrators. So in here I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to say system admins. And in terms of the policy, so your policy is a document that you attach to either users or to groups. So what do I want my system administrators to be able to do? Well, I want them to be able to administrate my AWS environment. So in here we can just type in admin. And you can see it's going to give us a whole bunch of different policies. So we've got administrator access and we've got system administrator. Now, if you want to know the difference between the 2, you can actually just drill down. So this is what a policy document looks like. You can see that it's in a JSON format. JSON, basically, it's key value pairs. So we've got our version here. We've got followed by our statement, and then what effect it has. So the effect is allow, action is, and then these a whole bunch of different things. So inside CloudTrail, for example, these people would be allowed to describe trails. And you can go through and have a read of it, but don't worry too much. You'll never be tested on this at this level anyway. Later on you might be tested on it at in the SysOps Administrator Associate exam or even in the security exam. So you can see the document down there. I'm going to scroll down and let's compare it to what our document is for administrator access. Now, administrator access here says provides full access to AWS services and resources. Administrator access is essentially the same level of access as what you have for your root account. And it's a really, really simple policy. It basically says effect, allow, action, everything, resources, everything. So it's basically saying, yep, you're allowed to do anything in this account. Now, of course, you probably wouldn't want to give administrator access to your sysadmins, but it really depends on your organization and if you trust them. For argument's sake, I'm just going to do it and go ahead and create our group. So all we need to do now is scroll down. We can go next review. and we've created our group. Go ahead and hit create users, and we've also created our users. Okay, so now we have created our users, Ryan and John, and we've applied them to our group. And you'll see here we get a whole bunch of different things. So Ryan has an access key ID and a secret access key, and we can see what that is by basically clicking on here. Now, this access key ID and secret access key is the tokens that you would use in order to programmatically interact with Amazon Web Services. So you can install the command line tools on your laptop, for example, and then you can actually run commands that execute against the AWS cloud. So you could have a whole bunch of different S3 buckets show up, and you could copy files from your laptop over to S3. And that's actually how Dropbox was started. A programmer started using S3, and he decided, he could design a really kick-ass storage solution, and that's how Dropbox was founded. So when you do that, when you're programmatically, interacting with AWS, you use your access key ID and your secret access key. When you're logging into the console, however, you're going to use your username and you're going to use the password here. Okay, so there's two different ways in which to interact with AWS. Now, you will never see these details again. This is it. If you basically lose this, you have to delete the users and recreate them. So you can download a CSV file here just by clicking there. You can also email these instructions to the users. Now, it's a very important exam point to understand that the access key ID and secret access key can only be used when you're programmatically, interacting with AWS. You can't use this access key ID and secret access key to log into the console, and likewise, you can't use your username and password to programmatically, interact with AWS. And we'll have lots more practical labs on that later on in the course. So once you've basically downloaded these credentials, definitely download the CSV file, go ahead and hit close. And we can see our users now, John and Ryan. They're in a group each. They haven't ever signed in. They've got an access key ID, and this is the creation time. And there's not much more we can do with these users. All we can do is add more users or delete them. So let's go ahead in here and create a new group, and we're going to put John into this group. We'll just call it, maybe John works in our HR department, so we'll call it HR. And then what I'm going to do in here is I want my HR users to only be able to read S3. So Amazon S3 read-only access. Go ahead and hit next and go ahead and create the group. So what I can do now is clicking on the group, I can remove John from this group. Go ahead and hit remove. And then if we go into our groups, go back here, we can go and add him into the HR group. So we go ahead and add John, go ahead and hit add users, and there we go. So now John only is able to, and we click on permissions, you can actually see what permissions are applied to this group. So he's only able to access 3 in a read-only capacity. Okay, so let's click on users and we'll go into John himself. And now you can see here his different permissions. So under the permissions section, you can see he can change his password. And then you can see he's getting this permission, Amazon S3 read-only access, and it's a managed policy from the group HR and even links to the group. So what we can do now is we can go and we can add permissions to John individually rather than adding it to a group. So let's click in here, and perhaps we want John to have Glacier access, but only him, not members of HR. Maybe John is the data archivist, so it's his responsibility to archive the data off to Glacier. So go in here and go and basically scroll down here and go next, and then we'll go and add permissions, and this will add permissions directly to John. So we can see here that he's got read-only access and it's not from a group, it's just directly attached to him. So you can attach permissions to users as well as to groups. The other thing I just want to quickly show you is just his security credentials. So if we do, we've got his access key ID. Notice that you won't see his secret access key, so you only get those credentials once, which is why you download them as a CSV or you email them to him. And if you want to make them inactive, you can. So now by clicking on that, he would no longer be able to programmatically access AWS. And then you can regenerate the keys by clicking here, create access key. And so that has created a new access key ID and secret access key, which you can see here. And now John will be able to interact with the AWS platform using that access key ID and secret access key. Now we can scroll back up here, click on groups. We can see that John is just a member of the HR group. And if we actually go into HR group, we can see that the only policy attached to it is S3 read-only access. So people in this group would not get access to Glacier. That's a policy document that's applied to John only. Now, if we go back to our dashboard, we've actually created our individual IAM users and we've used groups to assign permissions. We've got one last thing that we can do, which is apply an identity access management policy. So let's go ahead and do that. And basically this is just a password policy. So let's say our minimum password should be 12 characters. We want at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter. We want the password to expire every 90 days. We don't want the password to be reused. And then you can basically go ahead and hit apply password policy. And there we go. If we go back to our dashboard, we have completed 5 out of 5 and our security status is all lit up as green. Okay, so there's one last thing we're going to do before we move on, and we're just going to go over to roles, and we're going to create a new role. And a role is just a way of allowing one AWS service to interact with another. We're going to create this role for our EC2 section of the course. So I'm just going to call it S3-admin-access, and then just going to go ahead and hit next. And then what we need is, and I'll explain this a little later on when we start using it in EC2, but these are different service roles. So because we're going to be using this service role for EC2, we would select the EC2 service role. If we're using a role for Lambda, we'd select the Lambda role, etc. And then you've got different roles. This allows you to do cross-account access. So you can actually have one AWS account interacting with another AWS account, and we'll explore that in the account management section. And this is a role for identity provider access, and this is when you're using things like Facebook or LinkedIn, for example, to talk to your AWS resources. So what we want is the Amazon EC2 role. So this is going to allow our EC2 instances to talk to other AWS services, and you can see down here all the different services. So if we wanted EC2 to talk to Athena, for example, we have Amazon Athena full access. So all we need to do is type in here S3, and you can see here we've got read-only access, Redshift or DMS, Database Migration Services, Redshift S3 role, but what we actually want is this one, Amazon S3 full access. So just click on it, go ahead and hit next, and then on this screen just review everything, go ahead and hit create role. And let's go back to our dashboard, and now everything is green and we've created our first role, which will allow EC2 to talk to S3, and we'll be using that role later on in the EC2 section of the course. Now that's all we're going to do for IAM at this point in time. You are going to need to know it in a bit deeper detail later on before you sit your exam, but I don't want to start scaring you talking about how we can federate with Active Directory or how security token services work. It becomes quite complex. Let's just take it easy at this stage, and in the next section of the course we'll move on to S3 and we'll look at how we can basically store objects in buckets. Now that we have started using AWS, however, I'm just going to give you a quick lab on how we can set up billing alarms so that we don't go over a certain amount of billing per month. So we'll do that off in the next lab. It should be a very, very quick lab, and then we'll just summarize what we've learnt in this section of the course. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.